Well, good afternoon. I appreciate everyone coming together today. This is an important discussion we're having today, and I'm really proud to be joined by members of MCOLES, the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. It's a great group of people. You can see their bios and backgrounds. I appreciate all the emphasis from the law enforcement community, prosecutors, everyone working together as a team. Last October, I issued an executive directive to say how we could improve the public's trust in law enforcement. And as we all know, that's been a huge issue nationally. In Michigan, we have not had major problems there. We've had a lot of good positives going on, but it's not something to be taken for granted. And the question is how we can be the best. So how could we keep improving in terms of generating more trust in law enforcement? And when I say trust in law enforcement, I think it needs to be a mutual situation where as our citizens are out there in the public and they may have a need, a requirement, they may need help. They can feel confident calling on our law enforcement community to come keep them safe. And that's something that's critically important. The safety of our citizens is one of our paramount concerns. At the same time, I think it's critically important that our law enforcement community know how much appreciated and respected they are by the public. They put themselves in harm's way, and I appreciate their service and keeping us safe. So when we talk about this topic, I think it's important that we recognize it's about us doing things together, respecting one another, helping one another be successful and working together. And so that was the idea behind the directive. And to their credit, they took up this cause with great vigor. And I'll let them talk about the process they went through, and they had some fabulous help from great facilitators, but this was a teamwork effort to really go out and talk to the public and get a dialogue going with the public on three key areas. First one I mentioned already is community engagement. How do we get law enforcement more engaged with the community and vice versa? And then longer term, how do we look at the issues of recruitment and training? Because again, that's critically important, that we are recruiting in a diverse fashion that really represents the communities that our law enforcement officials are in, and that we have appropriate training tools, and we have best practices for training. So I think this is an outstanding process. I'm really proud of all the hard work that went on. We're having our session today, but to be open with you, I hope you take the time to look at the report, listen carefully to what people say, follow up with them, because you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of how much time and effort went into putting this report together. And it's something that I want to see actionable, that we can follow up and actually do good things and make sure Michigan's a leader in public trust in law enforcement. So I'm very proud of these folks, and I'm very thankful for them. So thank you so much for your service and this great effort. And with that, I'm going to turn over to a great partner that I have, that I've been proud to work with for a number of years at the state level. She's done a fabulous job, and she has a fabulous organization that's 100 years old.
That's true. Thank you, Governor.
Now, don't look at it all today, Colonel. So let me turn it over to Colonel Etchew.
Well, thank you, Governor. And before I get started, I actually chaired the community engagement part of this report. I do want to make mention, there's a couple people here in the audience that mean a great deal to public safety. I want to say a shout out to Chief Mike Yankowski from the Lansing Police Department, a very progressive chief, and he is very active in the Lansing All-PAC. He was part of the community engagement work group. Also, Victor Green, Mr. Green, he's the Detroit All-PAC chair. He also is with Wayne State University, director of community relations, and just a phenomenal person. And also Eric Hood. Here's Eric. Eric, you're over there. Thank you for being here. And Eric is Muskegon's NAACP president and very active, so thank you for being here. You know, as we look at this actual report, I want to also start by thanking Governor Snyder for giving MCOLES the nudge to do this at a time where quite often, a lot of times, the trust between the community and their law enforcement may be called to question. This governor has always supported law enforcement, and when he asked us to do this report, obviously it came out, it was a great product, but it really opened our eyes to some things as well. So back in 2016, the community engagement piece was kind of looking at three major themes when we surveyed statewide response. We looked at, when you engage the community and build trust, how do you balance fighting crime with also a non-law enforcement focus for law enforcement? How do you increase the visibility and the personal touch with the citizens you serve, the one-on-one contact? And then also, the survey really spoke to the fact that as law enforcement, we must engage our youth much more. And we have to get back in our schools and be able to meet these kids and talk to them about what they're actually dealing with and what best practices are out there. Our statewide survey gave us some kind of basic themes that, as you look at other research across the nation, the International Association of Chiefs of Police did quite a report as well. But the bottom line is, if you can engage the community, you will build trust. It's pretty simple, but on the same hand, when we start talking about engaging our youth, again, we should be talking to our youth about bullying and drug use and drug abuse and personal safety, things that we used to do a lot of, but for various reasons we're not so much engaged in that to the degree we'd like to be. Social media was a theme that came out of this report, that the community was very open and honest about the fact that they want more social media from their law enforcement. They want to know what we're doing, and they want an ability to reach out to law enforcement. And on the same hand, law enforcement too, working with social media, we've seen that to be a very useful tool. As Colonel of the State Police, I will tell you that I have made community engagement and community outreach a priority. It's on our strategic plan. We have some cool things we do with our local partners. Every state police post, there's 30 of them across the state of Michigan, have been required to do a Citizens Academy, so the citizens that we serve know exactly what state troopers or what the post in their area is doing. We stood up a caution, and maybe some of you have heard about it. It's a Community Action United team in our neighborhood that is actually the clergy and the ministers of that community working hand in glove with law enforcement at some very high profile homicides, and in some cases that we're working, the clergy work right with law enforcement. It's been very successful. It's been really embraced by not only the clergy, but the citizens as well. We run a team school liaison, teaching, educating, and mentoring K-12 program. And also, you've probably seen a lot of coffee with a cop or ice cream cone with a cop. Many law enforcement agencies do that, but it's breaking down those barriers and having that one-on-one personal contact. And then last but certainly not least, we're going to talk a little bit about the training. Chief Malloy will talk about the training component. But I also want to say, though, that, training for law enforcement, we have embraced a program called Fair and Impartial Policing. And in that, it talks about implicit biases and how every human has some kind of a bias. And how you deal with those and how you address those are so critically important today. And I will tell you, it's a U.S. Department of Justice program. We have 100% adopted it within the Michigan State Police. Every enlisted member has been through this. And as we work more closely with the communities that we serve, we found that training has helped us a great deal. So again, the community engagement piece was very important, and I just again thank the governor for the nudge to have us do that. And the MCOLES staff did a phenomenal job working on it. I know it was a heavy lift for them. So thank you. I now have an opportunity to introduce Dr. Humes, and she's going to talk about the forums that we held.
Great, thank you, Colonel. Good afternoon. I was asked to participate in this roundtable so that I could discuss some of the benefits of having a public forum. I want to start that with a quote. And the quote is this: men often don't like each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they cannot communicate. And they cannot communicate because they are separated. That was Dr. Martin Luther King from the Montgomery story in 1958. In 1958, and this gives us a context for framing why these public forums are so essential. Because the collaboration that takes place in the public forums helped identify why the separation exists and identify some strategies that are organic, in a sense, of eliminating or decreasing the separation. So these types of public forums are important because of at least two things. They allow community stakeholders to gather and together provide snippets of their personal narratives, which describes what they consider are challenges, the challenges they experience in their community with law enforcement. And it provides them a forum which is designed for them to be listened to by those who have the authority to make changes. The second thing that we believe happens in some of the best practice of public forums in this case, it allows our stakeholders, and let me be very clear, the stakeholders that participated in these public forums were not just community leaders, but mothers and fathers, as well as law enforcement personnel. It allowed them to get together and together collaboratively dialogue and identify strategies for addressing the challenges from their personal narratives. And then give an opportunity for policymakers to take those recommendations and implement them with fidelity and integrity at the local levels of government so that they can begin to increase building trust and relationships between communities and law enforcement. I have the privilege of conducting forums in Flint, Inkster, 2 in Muskegon Heights, in Muskegon Heights, 2 in Berrien County, and 1 in Marquette. The personal or community-related challenges that stakeholders discuss led to strategies that resonated again and again, regardless of where the forum was located. So no matter where we were in conducting these forums, there were some similarities of experiences that cross socioeconomics, that cross ethnicities, that cross gender, that cross sexual orientation, that they were human challenges and experiences that may have been more intensified in various communities as opposed to others. Some of the trends that we heard over and over was the need for law enforcement to provide agents professional development and training that increase community safety and where their competencies or skill sets that were necessary to implement effective and inclusive community policing techniques and strategies are taught and deliver the following results. So the communities wanted us to get back to community policing. They want you to get back to community policing and to develop those competencies and skill sets required in order to do that effectively. They want this because if you can do this, they believe that the results are this: transparent and continuous communication via social media, churches, schools, community organizations, block watches, policies and procedures and practices in local police districts that hold police accountable for having the skills to engage community members regardless of where they come from, who they are, or what they do, to develop, sponsor, and support community events which allow law enforcement to develop relationships with the community and non-crisis related situations. Over and over, we heard it would be nice to be able to interact with law enforcement when something of a crisis isn't happening. It's very difficult to build relationships when we're working, especially under duress. So take advantage of the football games, take advantage of the Little League games, take advantage of walking up the street and just walking up and introducing yourselves, getting to know people. The other was to identify existing law enforcement resources that help to increase trust and build positive relationships and create effective collaborative networks between agencies and organizations so that they could connect those resources that currently exist to the community. And one that resonated over and over, and I felt compelled to talk about today but might not be in the recommendations, is to establish equitable judicial systems. So as these strategies are being implemented and developed locally, that the local police agencies or law enforcement agencies work with those judicial systems so that they're on the same page when they're talking about what's an offense and what is good discipline or responses for that. And the last thing we talked about was that the work begins now. It didn't end with the public forums. It actually begins with the report. Citizens need to hold local agencies, mayors, city councils, chiefs of police, governors, accountable for operationalizing the recommendations in our communities. And the second is that policymakers have to be willing to do that on behalf of communities where self-realization is unattainable because they are overwhelmed with basic survival. Those were the takeaways. It was an honor, it was a privilege. I will be doing my citizen duty, my duty as a citizen, to stay engaged, which I've always been, to hold myself accountable and those that govern us. Thank you for the opportunity. And we will now be, I will be followed by Mr. Welling.
My name is Mike Wendling. I am the current chair of the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards and the St. Clair County Prosecutor. I represent the Prosecuting Attorneys Association on the commission. And when this directive came to us from the governor to go forward with this process and try and get some meaningful information and make meaningful recommendations to statewide law enforcement and training and the community as to how to foster a good relationship between the public and their law enforcement professionals, we had to set the process. And so the uninteresting task of making this, getting to the end result of hopefully a better relationship started with a process on how to do that. We had a pretty short timetable in order to put this information together, and I have to give a shout out to the staff at the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards who did the lion's share of the data compilation, the research, the putting together the instrument that we would use to do a survey, and my fellow commissioners. I see that Sheriff Donovan's here, and he's representing the Michigan Sheriff Association on the commission, and there are other representatives here, and they all worked together collectively in a short amount of time to put this together. So what we did is we took those 3 lines of inquiry that the governor has indicated, the community engagement, community policing aspect, research-based training related to fair and impartial policing, de-escalation, and interaction with people with specifically mental health issues, because many officer-involved shootings, officer-involved uses of force deal with those people who have may have mental challenges or deficiencies, and professional best practices so that we could implement those in the field of training with the training of new police officers and the assessment of current police officers that are serving us as citizens. That process, the commission process, started with the formation of a process committee, and I was the chair of the process committee, and we quickly drilled down to a community engagement chair, which was my colleague, Colonel Etu from Michigan State Police, a training committee, which was led by the Sheriff of Washtenaw County, Sheriff Clayton, and a recruiting committee that was led by the Chief of Novi Police Department, Chief Malloy. And throughout that process, we got together on a regular basis to make sure that we were getting towards the answers we were looking for. We had to start with an ability to collect the data, because we didn't want to just go to social media, go to the public, go to specific areas. We wanted a good cross-section of the different people who are engaging with law enforcement on a daily basis to determine what problems are out there. And not just those problems that hit the front page of the paper, but those problems on the day-to-day interaction between law enforcement and the citizens. We started with an online survey that was put together by the Commission on Law Enforcement Standards staff. We got input from many live community forums, which I believe the doctor also assisted us in chairing those committees. We went to the best practices in law enforcement through written testimony of officers and also site visits to different departments. And a lot of research was done internally through the MCOLES staff to determine what academic information was out there that could assist us in coming to appropriate conclusions. We advertised and marketed this process, and in a very short window of time, we wanted to get as much of a cross-section of our community, of our state as we could, in order to put together the right answers and the right conclusions. We did press releases, public service announcements, we did electronic distributions by the commission staff, we did distribution through civil rights and the LPACs. We went to the commission's contacts in the field and asked for information from them. We did advertising by work group members, we did site visits, presentations at meetings, and real contact with grassroots organizations who would give us good information that we felt was credible and a good cross-section. The community surveys we were very careful not to generalize in just the areas that had the highest levels of violence in the state. We tried to hit all the communities within the state of Michigan, but we did specifically target areas that had potentially strained relationships with law enforcement or a higher crime rate. So we did go to certain areas in the state that were those cities that have been identified by the state of Michigan that have higher needs as it relates to law enforcement. We created those survey items by group members, urban initiatives, and civil rights. We did a survey containing rating scale questions, yes, no items, and open-ended questions so that we could get good information and opinion from people. We posted online for a period of 3 months. We received almost 5,900 responses to our survey information from a good cross-section of the community, we believe, and we compiled that information into the report that will be released today. We did open-ended responses were analyzed by our community engagement group, and our rating scale responses were analyzed and shared with the work groups. Our community forums were held regionally, Benton Harbor, Detroit, Flint, Marquette, Grand Rapids. We had a professional facilitator, the esteemed doctor to my left, who held those meetings and gathered information. We had 204 total participants in those community forums, which were, in my opinion, a good representative of those communities in which we assessed. We had a focus statement, and our focus statement was how can we, with these communities, strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and their community. The statements were organized and summarized, and they are put into a report that will be released today. The staff shared all that data with the community work groups and formulated the recommendations, all those surveys and all that feedback. The major findings of the report, which are pretty easy to ascertain from the content that will be released, is most residents in this state are satisfied with police-community relations, but there is more that we can do. Most residents are satisfied with the respect that they receive from law enforcement officers, from police, but better efforts can be made in that regard also. Officers need, one overwhelming consideration was officers need to get out of their cars. Officers need to interact more on a face-to-face basis with the people in their communities in non-confrontational settings, especially one-on-one and casual encounters. Honesty and integrity are the most important qualities to the public when hiring law enforcement officers. Transparency is very important to the public as it relates to law enforcement agencies, and officers need to have continuing education, although as a prosecutor I'd say legal, but probably education in a lot of different areas, but continuing education in subjects such as de-escalation, unbiased policing, and communication skills. The summary of those recommendations based upon the information obtained from citizens, law enforcement professionals, and community groups led to recommendations of law enforcement agencies, and those were increase your visibility in neighborhoods and create more one-on-one interaction with the citizen, interact more with the youth, create police community programs, foster a positive organizational structure and culture, diversify your workforce, and hire from your own communities. People want to be policed by people who come from the community in which they serve. The recommendations from the commission were to update the job task analysis for different roles within police departments, require all officers to attend periodic training throughout their careers, not just at the beginning, require academic instructors to pass instructor development courses, and ensure the basic training curriculum includes procedural justice, unbiased policing, communication skills, and de-escalation. The biggest safety concerns in our areas pursuant to community surveys and the forums are crime, the fear of crime, and drugs sales. The public, when dealing with law enforcement, feel that those are the major areas that their police forces need to identify and work with. And the best traits for police officers to have are honesty, integrity, and compassion. I think that I was pleasantly surprised with the information that was taken back from those agencies through the process committee. That information will then be turned over to the Chief of Novi Police Department, David Malloy, who will then work towards recruitment and training, and that will be the next step of this process. And I think when that recruitment and training part is completed, this report will lead to a great success and an improvement of law enforcement relations with the public. So at this time, I'd like to introduce David Malloy, Novi Police Department.
Thank you, Mr. Wendling, and thank you as well to the governor for being the driving force behind this. I would also like to thank our MCOLES staff who did an outstanding job in not only collecting the data, but preparing the final report. I would also like to thank Chief Yankowski from the Lansing Police Department who served on the recruitment committee, Mr. Tom Adams for Chance for Life, our citizen component of the MCOLES Executive Board, and it really brought a good perspective on how there's no doubt every single one of us in this room want the very best and brightest protecting our communities, to provide that sense of safety. But as law enforcement executives and community leaders, we need to focus on building that community, not only from a community policing standpoint, but the new recruits that we bring into our organization, they have to be taught that they are part of that community. They have to get out of their police cars, as Mr. Wendling said, and get into the neighborhoods so they can build that public trust. We have a mantra in our organization that we treat every contact as an opportunity to build public trust, whether you're issuing a traffic warning or having a contact with a complaint because of a crime or some type of juvenile mischief. Treat that opportunity, treat it as an opportunity to build that public trust. And also, we need to build an image and a brand, and that begins with social media, making sure that your communities, your organizations are engaged in all platforms of social media. People want information. They want to know what's happening in their community, and I think it's incumbent upon us as community leaders to make sure that happens, and that's a great recommendation. Also, a diversity of our workforce. We want law enforcement agencies to be reflective of our communities. That can be a difficult task in some communities based upon the diversity, but not only just ethnicity, but also gender and race diversity and religious diversity. That is so important, so there's not some type of phobia of a new religion, or there's a mosque that's open on the corner and we must have some type of illegal activity. No, they're community members just like every one of us sitting here. We also need to make sure that when we're bringing our young men and women into this great profession of law enforcement, that we stay engaged with them. There's no mystery that the background process takes a very long time to vet a young man or young woman to become a police officer. We need to assign mentors to them to make sure that they are engaged in that process so they understand that we are still very much interested in them and we want them to serve our community. We're also going to work with MCOLES to make sure that we have the right components in our basic training academies. If there's new information that needs to be added, the Colonel alluded to the fair and impartial policing or implicit bias. We need to make sure that our young people are getting that not only at the academy level, but in their field training program, but also on an annual and sustained basis, so we are continually drumming that there's always going to be an opportunity to build trust. And lastly, recognizing we do have some out-of-state people that come in, they come back from our wars abroad with military experience, but also they come to Michigan from other states. We need to work on our waiver program so we can recognize some of that prior police experience and get those folks in, and to make sure that we have the absolute best and brightest protecting our communities. From the training component, I know MCOLES, we talked about this morning, an updated job task analysis. Do our men and women coming in to law enforcement have the right skill sets? Are they being taught the right things at the academy? Not only for our frontline police officers, but do our police supervisor and our managers and our leaders, are they getting updated job tasks so they understand what we expect of them, but probably more importantly, what the community expects of them. In addition, we're going to take a look at our in-service training. The prosecutor talked about continuing education. We do it in the medical field. We do it in the fire profession. Why do we not have our police officers engaged in continuing education where they can go and earn online credits or attend a class and just learn a better way of doing things in order to build that public trust? We should also take a look at what our instructors are doing. We have hundreds of academy instructors that may not be real skilled in developing their lesson plans or being able to control a lecture or moderate a discussion like Dr. Humes, and we need to focus on that as well. And lastly, diversity of thought. We need to make sure that our men and women understand that we are going to work with people of different colors, of different religions, of different socioeconomic backgrounds. The training and dealing with people with mental illness is so critical, and just understanding that there's going to be different folks with different worldviews, and we need to prepare our men and women because that is what's going to keep our communities safe. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Governor Snyder.
Great. Well, hopefully you can see how impressive this was. Again, thank you for the great work and sharing all those thoughts. A big endeavor, but now we've got our work cut out for us to go get it done. So with that, we'll open it up for on-topic questions. I think Anna's getting the mic all set.
That's already doing more with a lot less. A lot of these recommendations are great, but how does a city like Flint that already doesn't have a lot of resources, that's already strapped thin, put some of these suggestions into practice without taking officers off the street or without stopping to fight crime, it seems like they need more help, and is that something that the state's willing to look into?
Well, I think that's not an issue just in Flint, it's an issue everywhere in many respects, because that goes back to the comment about community engagement, about getting out of the vehicle more, having the opportunity to walk the neighborhood, just talk to people, because there's always demand on resources, so this is that balancing act. So how do you find the best way to balance those resources? And it's not easy. The same thing is, how do you take people off the street to say they're gonna be in training? If you stop and look at, though, the benefits of them stopping that amount of time to go into training can add that much more value when they're out on the street, both in terms of their community engagement, but potentially even making it safer for them in the job they're doing. So this is something where we need to have that discussion, and as a state, I'm always open to listening to that, is how can we partner better together? Are there ways departments can share things, that we can partner with local communities and help cover things so they have time to go to training? Those are all kinds of the questions we should have on the table to talk about and think about.
How widely is community policing used now? And then if it were to be expanded, where would those resources come from? Because obviously it's expensive to do that, to have, officers in different neighborhood precincts and things like that. Is that widely used now, or is that something that could be either legislative or municipal?
I don't think it necessarily takes legislation. I think you take a look at what Chief Yankowski's doing, what Sheriff Donlan's doing. It's getting your officers to connect with the community. And community policing is literally getting to know the individual, stopping by someone's house. We have over 120 different neighborhood subdivisions in our community, and our officers, depending on what district you work, you're required to make contact with some of those folks every single month. It could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be you're driving through their neighborhood and you see them outside and stopping and getting out of that car and saying, hey, just to let you know, we had a couple youngsters who may have been trying to break into cars here recently, keep things locked up. It's building that personal one-on-one interaction and getting that sense of trust. So community policing, I don't think is ever anything that needs to be legislated. I think it's a philosophy that an organization, you can't have a bureau of community policing, you have to have community policing throughout your entire organization. And it starts at the academy training, the field training program, and then obviously re-emphasizing that through ongoing annual sustained training.
If I may, Chief, if it's okay, I can't speak from a law enforcement perspective, but I can bring the perspective from some of the community. And what they wanted didn't cost a dime. It wouldn't have cost an extra dime. The majority of individuals that comprised of, I'm not saying that to combat this, not gonna take resources, but what they were primarily saying that they need first. And mind you that the stakeholders that made up the forums weren't ex-convicts, they weren't criminals, many of them have not had run-ins with law enforcement, and they didn't feel respected by law enforcement. And so they feel getting out the car and being able to say good morning and have a conversation so that you can really see that everyone in this community isn't a criminal, and that we can actually help you. It just goes back to relationship building. The trust will never happen if you don't see me, not from my worldview, but understanding that you've changed your worldview to make room for me. Not having to see my behaviors in a certain particular way in order to realize that I'm just like you. And so that goes back to that training that you were talking about in terms of fixed mindsets, so that we can start to see the human in one another again. Costs nothing.
And from the community engagement forums, the ones that I went to, I thought there was a real enlightenment from the community also that they have a role in this. I mean, we always look to the breakdown between law enforcement and the community as a law enforcement problem, and it is. There's a portion of that that's a law enforcement problem, but it's also a community problem. And people need to, while police officers may feel they're not trusted by the community, sometimes the community's not trusted by law enforcement either because of the way they interact with law enforcement. So I think it's a two-way street. And the community members who engaged in that conversation, at least on a face-to-face basis with law enforcement officials in their area, acknowledged that. And they knew that they had a role to play in this fostering a strong, productive relationship with law enforcement too.
Yeah, there's a lot of great opportunities. I mean, one that I ran across last year was at Kalamazoo County Fairgrounds. They were doing a career fair and career tech education, and the state police had an exhibit there. They had one of the cruisers. And it was wonderful to watch that these two troopers, there were two young women in the vehicle. It was 100% clear to me they had no interest in becoming a trooper. But I think the opportunity for them to sit in that vehicle, that's an experience they were gonna be sharing with literally hundreds of young people. I'm quite sure of that, given the dialogue I had with them. But they thought it was fabulous, just to sit there and understand, because the computer was there and stuff like that, and just to have them 5 minutes where they could sit in a cruiser to actually get some appreciation and have some dialogue in a positive way. That doesn't sound like much, but it's a big deal.
I'd like to ask, we've seen in some cases in Michigan and around the country, you can have a problem officer who not only hurts the community, but stains the reputation of the other officers who are out doing a good job every day. Did the group discuss at all giving MCOLES more authority over problem officers? I know last year the legislature added a handful of misdemeanors to revocable offenses. I'm wondering if there was discussion on going even further.
Well, that's an issue that's been discussed at MCOLES at the commission level, and if maybe more crimes need to be added to that list, or maybe the process needs to be more aggressive. But then there's also a school of thought that those communities that hire those officers also need to weed out the people in their own agency who are a problem. They certainly know about it, their chiefs, their lieutenants, their sergeants, and potentially that's the best place to deal with a problemed officer. And then obviously if they commit a felony or commit a criminal offense, MCOLES certainly steps in and can work from that standpoint.
I just wonder because some other states are much stricter in Michigan, as I'm sure you're all aware. The MCOLES seems to have a local control approach.
Well, not specifically local, but in a partnership with departments. I mean, a lot could be said, the same could be said for lawyers, right? I mean, lawyers don't do a very exceptional job of policing their own also at times.
But I think every law enforcement agency has an office to which if a citizen feels that they have a complaint, they go to that police department, or even some of the social media comments have been, could they, make some comments online? But I know that almost every law enforcement office has that professional standards section that I don't think any chief, any sheriff, I don't want officers that are not serving well. They don't represent this noble profession. And so we should internally have those strong processes that if there is someone out there that's not representing well, we should handle it as a police agency.
And do you think for the most part that works?
I do. I think for the most part, I think most agencies take that very seriously, because when you look at an officer that does something that the citizens are, you're losing trust, the confidence, the integrity of that officer is not there. We don't want them in law enforcement. We want them to not wear this uniform, because whether you're wearing, state police or a local, you represent law enforcement 100%.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.